Good morning, all. Dr. Pete here. Our topic today is hyperuricemia and why I think it should be treated. And we start right now. My name is Dr. Pete. I'm a PhD biochemist, nutrition network health practitioner, and accredited by the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. And I am a specialist in the area of gout. I have the Gout Intensive coming up on January 21st. This is the first ever in the world intensive for those people that are interested in the issue of hyperuricemia and putting their gout in remission. And I have spent the last 4 years training and thinking and reading hundreds of papers and responding to many clients out there in terms of coaching the gout condition. And I have put all of this information together now into a Saturday morning, 4 hours with follow-up sessions over the course of the next month. And this is a great opportunity if you're frustrated, you've suffer from gout, and you are looking for a way to put gout in remission. This is a great opportunity, and right now there's early bird pricing. So go to www.drpetesgoutintensive.com and sign up today. All right, so the subject that we're going to address today live is hyperuricemia. This comes up a lot. I get a lot of questions about this because we really have two issues here that are going on. We have the person who is suffering from gout, and there is a connection between hyperuricemia and gout. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. And then we have people that are suffering from hyperuricemia, but are not gout sufferers. So the question becomes whether you suffer from gout or whether you suffer from hyperuricemia and not gout, what you should do about the hyperuricemia. And so what I want to do this morning is explore that issue. First, and many of you that follow me, you've seen this slide a lot. This is the place that we're going to start, essentially, is with the statistics in regard to gout and hyperuricemia. This is always the place that I start. But you've got to understand, with my mission, is that I almost never focus on observational or associational studies. And there's a reason why I don't. And that's because that kind of data does not offer us causation. But we need to start here to understand the level of hyperuricemia that we have basically in the US. And we see that we have around 4% in terms of gout sufferers. And like I said, there is a connection between hyperuricemia and gout. But remember, and this is an important fact, that hyperuricemia doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to have gout. But on the other side of that coin, hyperuricemia may be a contributing factor or a driver of other comorbidities, other kinds of ailments in addition to the gout condition. And we see that there's 43 million people that have hyperuricemia or high uric acid. And to put that number in context, one needs to realize that there's actually fewer type 2 diabetics in the US. Full-blown type 2 diabetics in the US is somewhere around 30 or 35 million in terms of the diabetes, somewhere in that realm. And we see that people with high uric acid actually outnumber those individuals. When we look at the amount of uric acid, the average value, basically the mean of uric acid when someone suffers from a gout flare, it's about 8.3 mg per deciliter. So the current accepted range of uric acid by the medical establishment is a value that's between 4 mg per deciliter of uric acid and 8 mg per deciliter. And this is essentially, I feel that this is an arbitrary range, but nevertheless, this is what the medical establishment is using to define whether or not somebody is high uric acid or not. And we see that the mean concentration of uric acid is around 8.3 for a gout flare, which is literally at the top of that range. It's not outside it. Although there are people that have gout flares with uric acid concentrations that are much higher than 8. But when you look at the data, you can see also that there is a wide variety of people that have gout flares with uric acid that's well within the normal range. Another interesting issue here is that you can have uric acid crystals, or to be more correct about it, monosodium urate crystals in a joint and not have a gout flare. So we therefore need to ask the question, what is the uric acid doing in a crystallized form when we find it deposited in various locations around the human body? And I'm going to talk about this phenomenon here in a second, because this is the thing that really drove me over the edge. And I realized, okay, hyperuricemia is most likely not benign. All right. And let's move into the argument why I think that that's the case. So first off, I want to point out that we have known for a really, really long time. In fact, I'm going to talk about a little bit of data today. I'm just going to refer to it that goes all the way back to the 1850s. Yeah, I actually said that, all the way back to the 1850s. And like with a lot of metabolic diseases that are out there, besides gout, diabetes would be another one, for example, the situation with obesity, and all of these have strong overlap with hyperuricemia, right? There's about 25% of all type 2 diabetics also suffer from high uric acid. Similarly, we see that with obesity. It's somewhere around 74% of those that suffer from chronic kidney disease are also hyperuricemic. So there's a lot of overlap with these diseases and the relationship to uric acid. But way back in the 60s, we knew then that there was a connection between hyperuricemia and gout, but we understood that the uric acid was not sufficient to cause a gout flare. Therefore, the presence of uric acid in a certain location, in combination with other factors, can lead to ailments. And I specialize in the area of gout, but there are questions about high uric acid and its relationship to cardiovascular disease, as an example. All right. And right now, that's an association. But I think that clinical data and animal studies are starting to lead in the direction that the deposition, right, the formation of these crystals in other locations besides our joints, besides a finger joint or besides a toe joint, that if these other conditions are there, that this can lead to diseases that right now are not recognized. So what is the situation with the high uric acid? All right. So we basically, as humans, functionally deal with uric acid on 3 levels. There is a production issue that mainly has to do with the liver, right? The liver is the captain of this. And I've talked about this extensively, the relationship between these metabolic pathways. This is not a singular type of pathway issue, but we have the relationship between how glucose is processed and how fructose is processed. And those pathways are integrated. And as we eat in a certain way, alcohol, hyperglycemia, and added sugars, we activate fructose uric acid metabolism in the liver. And what we see happen there is as that fructose is processed, regardless of whether it's being produced endogenously, all right, within the liver from the conversion of the overaccumulation of glucose, right, the hyperglycemia, much of that glucose is going to be funneled into the production of endogenous fructose. And then we have the added sugar that provides exogenous fructose coming in from the outside, from the digestive tract. And regardless of how the fructose gets there, when it's processed by the liver, we see a decimation of the ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. We see decimation of the phosphate that is in the liver, and we see this sudden acute rise in uric acid. And as the uric acid comes out or comes into the liver, right, it's being produced there. Besides the fact that it's driving systemic inflammation, reprogramming of the liver into fat storage, right, and disruption of the nitric oxide pathway, which downstream has published effects on driving cardiovascular disease. Besides that, the liver is going to start pushing uric acid out into the circulatory system. And this is, in my opinion, perhaps the major driver of high uric acid in the circulatory system. And the system that I'm talking about here seems to be not only hyperactivated. So in other words, once you start eating this certain way, so you have alcohol, you have the hyperglycemia, and you have the added sugars. Along with it, there are some other aspects here, not to overcomplicate this, but sleep issues like sleep apnea also contribute to this as a main driver. The point being is that over time, this system seems to remain in a hyperactivated state, so that somebody who's suffering from this hyperuricemia tends to overproduce uric acid on a chronic level. Now, we also excrete it, but what most people don't realize is that about 90% of the circulating uric acid that reaches the kidneys is reabsorbed. And overall, only about 10% of the uric acid is actually being excreted into the urine. We also degrade uric acid intestinally by the gut biome. However, the science in regard to the gut biome is still at a very young age, and it is very, very complicated. And we don't yet know exactly what that contribution is and what we have to do to enhance the ability of the healthy bacteria that are in there that carry out this function. That more than any of this stuff is still a big question mark. Although in everything that I just said, there are still big question marks. But I think it's safe to say that the liver is the big producer here and is driving the hyperuricemic state. There is a major contribution by the kidneys, however, and we know that there's some genetic evidence that suggests that uric acid transporters or their lack of function may also be contributing here. So like there's a balance, right? And we don't yet know what that balance is between the production effect via the liver and the excretion effect by the kidney. What we do know is that to fix hyperuricemia, we need to address both of those issues. And this just covers what I just said, that basically most of the uric acid that's circulating that reaches the kidneys is going to be reabsorbed. A smaller segment of that is actually going to end up being excreted. Now, basic science and a lack of understanding of this is the central reason why I believe hyperuricemia needs to be treated. Now, let's talk about this briefly, right? And this has to do with the physical laws of diffusion. And they are very clear cut, and there's nothing that you can do about them as long as the circulatory system is separated by whatever the compartment is that we're talking about here. This could be the spine, other organ systems, for example, the brain. Kidneys are affected this way. The movement of uric acid from the circulatory system into these other organ systems, at least right now, looks like it's governed by diffusion. And diffusion is a movement of substances down a concentration gradient. And there is nothing that you can do about that movement down a concentration gradient unless you build into this some type of energetic system, a system that requires energy that pushes that material out against a concentration gradient, which to my knowledge in the science dating all the way back to 1850s does not exist for uric acid. Uric acid moves down a concentration gradient as long as the membrane that it is crossing is semi-permeable. And that's what this slide is displaying, is the basic concept of diffusion. So if we have somebody that is hyperuricemic, like I was, right? I've gone through this whole process in my life of getting gout remission, and I used to be hyperuricemic, which means I had high uric acid. It was hovering after keto adaptation in the low carb environment. My uric acid was hovering between 7 and 8, and sometimes I would have episodes that would go as high as 11 or 12. So when you look at this diagram and you focus on the left side of it, in my circulatory system, I had a high concentration of uric acid. My joints or other locations in the body, like along the spine, the tendons and ligaments, and even our cardiovascular system, the endothelial layer there. All right. These are areas that are at a relatively low concentration of uric acid by comparison to the circulatory system. And so the laws of diffusion state that the uric acid will move down a concentration gradient until the amount of uric acid in the circulatory system is equalized against whatever compartment that system is sitting against the circulatory system with a semi-permeable membrane. And like I said, the uric acid is moving down a potential energy gradient. You know, think about the water behind a dam. You poke a hole through the dam into the water at the base of the dam, and common sense dictates, because of the difference in the height of the water behind the dam versus what's coming out at the bottom, the water's going to come shooting out, right? And that's going to go on until the level of water behind the dam is equivalent to the level of water outside the dam. Chemical substances work exactly the same way. If we have a whole stack of this substances sitting behind a membrane, and now we start to, and the two membranes on both sides have equivalent amounts of water. If we then poke holes in that membrane, you know, micro holes, then connecting the two sides, then the substance that is dissolved on the left side in the water will move to the right until the concentration of that substance is equal on both sides of that membrane. There's not a thing you can do to stop that process unless you plug up all the holes, and now we don't have a semi-permeable membrane anymore, and we put some kind of energetic system in place to burn energy to transport repeatedly the substance that leaks through back to the other side. And this is depicted here. So I took this picture from a publication that references there that is idealizing the chondrocyte in a joint. And I'm just using this to demonstrate this phenomenon. So on the right side is the circulatory system with a high concentration of uric acid. On the left, we have the joint compartment, which is a relatively low concentration of uric acid, and with the semi-permeable membrane, which I'm showing there in the middle with all the slots, then the uric acid is going to move into the joint until the concentration of uric acid is equal on both sides of that membrane. This is the phenomenon that I'm talking about. Now, with hyperuricemia, the joint isn't the only place where we have this going on. Uric acid moves down a concentration gradient, period. And anywhere that the circulatory system is connected to other tissues, then there's going to be this pressure, if you will, this pressure that for uric acid to move from the circulatory system into these other compartments. Do we have data for this? Absolutely. So this is an imaging system that is called dual energy computational tomography. That's really complicated language for a CT scan that has been altered energetically to be able to look for other things. And that green splotchy material you see there is the deposition of uric acid crystals on this individual's spine. And this was a 2014 paper. If you start doing searches in this kind of area, you will find a lot of examples. Here is a paper that was published in 2020 where they found literally 290 examples of uric acid crystalline deposits throughout the human body from a variety of well-done science, clinical, and also in vitro. That means in glass, where they looked at tissue culture, they looked at tissue samples and identified the presence of uric acid crystals. And you can see that in a hyperuricemic individual that they have crystallization of uric acid going on literally throughout their body. And a valid question is, what the hell is it doing there, right? And what are the conditions for the crystallization? This is the kind of stuff that we're going to cover in the gout intensive. I'm not going to go there today. But one of the worrying things about this is the level of crystallization you find in the cardiovascular system in people that are hyperuricemic and gout sufferers together. They even have crystallization going on their heart valves, right? Think about that for a minute, on their heart valves. And so what is my rationale for treating hyperuricemia? And I think if you follow me, everybody knows that pretty much treating hyperuricemia boils down to two things: taking a urate lowering drug, something like allopurinol, which I advocate for. And in today's short programming, the reason I advocate for this is what I just put out to you. The fact that we have in hyperuricemic individuals, the crystallization of uric acid in all kinds of different locations in the body. The cardiovascular system is probably the most worrisome of the locations, but we also know that uric acid is crystallizing in the kidneys. And maybe that is the reason why. And in fact, there's two kinds of data for this. This is probably one of the major driving factors in chronic kidney disease, because we know from clinical and in vitro work in animal systems that the movement of uric acid from the circulatory system into proximal tubular cells can drive the inflammatory response. And then we also know that we find crystals of uric acid there in hyperuricemic individuals. Now, just because we find the crystals there doesn't mean that that's causing the chronic kidney disease, but we have clinical and we have proximal tubule data that shows that the movement of uric acid from the circulatory system into these cells can drive the inflammatory state. And that's the kind of evidence that I think is highly valuable to those of us that are hyperuricemic and gout sufferers, that helps us make decisions about, number one, getting gout remission, and then number two, trying to sort out how to reduce the hyperuricemia. So what is the main goal of bringing hyperuricemia down? And I use allopurinol to do that. It is a drug people will cite that it can have severe side effects. Yeah, of course it can. But the truth is, when you ask the question, how many people out there who take allopurinol suffer from side effects? And the answer to that is a very small percentage. Allopurinol, it turns out, medically, and I'm not a medical doctor, but I know how to read the research. Allopurinol is a relatively safe drug. Most people don't suffer side effects from it, and it's very effective at bringing liver uric acid down, which in my view is probably the major production effect. Although there are other organs in the body that also produce uric acid and no doubt contribute something to the circulatory effect of it. So what is the goal? So look carefully at this diagram, and by lowering the uricemia, the uric acid in your circulatory system, and picking a low target. So my target is between 3 mg per deciliter and 4 mg per deciliter, very low. What am I trying to do there? Look at the right side of the screen and think back to what I showed you before about the laws of diffusion. So now in the circulatory system, we have pushed the uric acid down to a relatively low level compared to what you find in the compartments because of the previous condition of walking around with hyperuricemia all the time. So in this case, I'm using this very idealized illustration again of a joint because I'm a gout specialist. And in the joint, we have relatively high uric acid. But now we're treating the hyperuricemia, so we bring the uric acid down. Now the uric acid is lower than the concentration of uric acid that you find in the joint space and also these other locations around the body. So what happens? The uric acid will move from those compartments into the circulatory system. The urate lowering drug is being taken for the long term. So we are constantly keeping the concentration low in the circulatory system. So we maximize the movement of uric acid from these spaces into the circulatory system. We have to play the long-term game here because we want the uric acid chronically to move from these spaces into the circulatory system. We need it to spend a lot of time there because we know that the excretion at the level of the kidneys can be a slower long-term process that has to occur. So we need to optimize for that, allowing plenty of time for the uric acid moving now into the circulatory system instead of the other way to make its way to the kidneys and be there long enough so that overall the process of excretion into the urine can be optimized. And so I think, number one, we need to all be taking hyperuricemia seriously. I understand the arguments out there about, well, it's a, antioxidant, down the road we go. But when you look at the historical data, and this is some of the things that we're going to talk about in the Gout Intensive, we know that, for example, men in the early 1900s had average uric acids that were between 3 and 3.5 mg per deciliter. We have something that's now going on in 2022, almost 2023, that is different than then. And I'm not claiming to know all of the reasons why gout happens. I don't. But I think that the gout hypothesis that I talk about almost constantly here is more on track than anyone else in the world, right? We're moving all the time with new information and our ability to more effectively deal with that. The issue of hyperuricemia is also very, very important. So when you look at hyperuricemia historically, humans had lower uricemia. We did. And so my decision to use a urate lowering drug and bring that concentration down between 3 and 4 is based on what the value was for males in the early 1900s that preceded the ingestion of sugar and these other issues that are now so prevalent in our food system that have been shown to be very strong drivers, not only of gout, but also hyperuricemia. So I am using historical data to help me make that decision. Now, the other thing has to do with the excretion. And we know from data, again, well done science that's been published in regard to being on a urate lowering drug like allopurinol and at the same time using potassium citrate. the combination of those things together seems to enhance not only reducing production at the level of the liver, but also enhancing the excretion effect. So I also recommend thinking about the other intervention, which is bringing potassium citrate into your life. And I've published other videos about this. I would encourage you to if you haven't subscribed to my my YouTube channel, I would suggest that you do that and look at these other videos and get caught up with where we're at. So with that, I'm going to close this morning. We're at 30 minutes. I don't really want to go over that time very much. I would encourage you, if you do suffer from hyperuricemia, you're a gout sufferer and you really want to put this to bed, you're sick and tired of following the establishment interventions for this and getting nowhere with it, I have a very powerful remission program. This is going to happen on January 21st, 2023. And right now you can still get early bird pricing. So please go there and sign up. I'd really love to have you. If you're a medical practitioner and you're listening to this and you want to come up on speed in regard to the causations, the potential causations of gout, the most sophisticated representation of this science in the world, and then the strategies for putting gout into remission and then maintaining gout remission as we go into our life, please sign up, www.drpetesgoutintensive.com. And that's it for today. I hope everyone is having a great holiday season, and I will see you next time, the next time I publish a video. Thanks for your attention this morning.